Bone and clothing fragments found in a renewed search for Madeleine McCann.
May 3rd, 2007, Praia da Luz, Portugal. A resort town bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, promising serenity and peace, prepared for the night. The air was saturated with the scent of the salty sea and blooming plants. But this night brought not rest, but a chilling terror, whose echo would reverberate across the globe for decades. In apartment 5A of the Ocean Club Resort Complex, a 3-year-old girl named Madeleine McCann vanished from her bed. There were no screams to pierce the night's silence, no signs of a desperate struggle. Her younger twin siblings, 2-year-old Sean and Amelie, continued to sleep peacefully in their cribs, just a few feet from the empty space where their sister had just been. The front door was locked from the inside, just as her parents had left it. But the window in their bedroom, which faced a quiet street, was wide open, and the exterior metal shutters, which should have been securely lowered and locked, had been raised. This could only have been done by someone outside, someone with strength and intent. Just 55 meters away on the terrace of a tapas restaurant, her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, were dining with friends. They had created a system that seemed reliable and reasonable to them, taking turns checking on the children every half hour. They were confident they were close enough to hear any sound, any disturbance. But on this fateful night, their confidence was shattered. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. Not the neighbors, not other guests, not the staff. The timeline of events was full of gaping holes that were impossible to fill. Was it a kidnapping, planned to the smallest detail by a cold-blooded predator? A tragic accident that someone was desperately trying to conceal, setting off a chain reaction of lies? Or something even more sinister, hiding under the cover of darkness and family secrecy? The story of Madeleine McCann is not just a missing child case. It is a labyrinth of contradictions, a devastating failure of law enforcement, the mercilessness of the media, and the unbreakable love of parents who refuse to give up in the face of the unthinkable. Years later, there are only more questions, and the main one, haunting the world, remains unanswered. Where is Madeleine McCann? Before their surname became synonymous with tragedy, Kate and Jerry McCann were the embodiment of the British dream. Educated, successful, hardworking. Jerry, a respected consultant cardiologist, and Kate, a general practitioner who had temporarily left her career for her family. Their life in the quiet, almost idyllic village of Rothley in Leicestershire was stable, comfortable, and full of hope. From the outside, it seemed they had everything one could dream of. A beautiful home, prestigious professions, a strong marriage. But behind this facade of well-being was a long and painful road to parenthood. Years of struggling with infertility had been a painful chapter in their marriage, filled with quiet tears, unfulfilled hopes, and endless medical procedures that were both physically and mentally draining. After 5 years of desperate attempts, they turned to a last resort, in vitro fertilization, IVF. And finally, in May of 2003, their prayers were answered. Madeleine Beth McCann was born. To them, she was a true miracle, long-awaited and hard-won. Bright, curious, full of inexhaustible energy and a love for life. She was so special, Jerry recalled fondly in an early interview. She looked like Kate, but she inherited the McCann character. Loud, a true extrovert. For her age, she was so articulate and was a real ringleader among the younger children. On holiday, she was the eldest of 8 children, and she loved every minute of it. That's the image I hold in my head. They affectionately called her Maddie. A few years later, another miracle occurred, this time completely unexpected. Kate became pregnant naturally and gave birth to twins, Sean and Amelie. The McCann family felt complete and utterly happy. Madeleine, as the older sister, adored her younger brother and sister, showing surprising care and tenderness. She was the center of their small universe. In the spring of 2007, they planned a week-long vacation in sunny Portugal. They chose the Ocean Club Resort in Praia da Luz in the Algarve region. The dates were simple, from Saturday, April 28th to Saturday, May 5th. It was meant to be a relaxing, informal getaway with their closest friends. They weren't traveling alone. With them came 7 of their friends, mostly doctors and medical professionals whom the press would later dub the Tapas 7. Dr. David Payne with his wife Fiona and her mother Diane Webster, Dr. Russell O'Brien with his partner Jane Tanner, and Dr. Matthew Oldfield with his wife Rachel. Together, they brought 5 more children, creating a large and lively group. Their evenings followed an established ritual, a group dinner at the Tapas restaurant on the resort grounds while the children slept in the nearby apartments. It was an idyllic picture, filled with laughter, wine, and a sense of complete security. They were among friends, in a beautiful place, far from their worries. No one could have imagined that this paradise would soon become the site of their personal hell, and their names would become known to the entire world for the most terrible reason possible. Apartment 5A, where the McCanns were staying, was on the ground floor, overlooking a small, quiet street outside the main complex. This was a crucial detail. The apartment was not within a secured perimeter. Any passerby could freely approach the windows or the sliding patio doors that opened onto a small terrace. The Tapas restaurant, where the group dined each evening, was approximately 50 to 55 meters away. The distance seemed negligible, but it was critical. There was no direct line of sight from the restaurant terrace to the apartment. The view was blocked by hedges and other buildings. On the evening of May 3rd, around 8:30 p.m., Kate and Jerry sat down at the table with their friends. Their children, like their friends' children, were asleep in their apartments. They didn't have baby monitors. This decision would later draw a storm of criticism, but at that moment, it seemed reasonable. They were nearby. They checked on the children regularly. It was a system built on trust and the belief that nothing bad could happen. 9:05 p.m. Jerry McCann gets up from the table for the first check. He uses his key to enter the apartment through the front door. In the children's bedroom, he sees Madeleine sleeping peacefully in her bed by the window. The twins, Sean and Amelie, are asleep in their cribs. Everything is fine. He notices the bedroom door was left ajar and leaves it in the same position so that the light from the hallway won't wake the children. He lingers for a moment, making sure the children are sleeping soundly, then quietly locks the front door and returns to the restaurant. On the way, he stops for a brief conversation with another resort guest, Jeremy Wilkins. Around 9:15 p.m., Jane Tanner, one of the friends returning after checking on her own children, notices a dark figure who would become central to one of the theories. A man tall and thin, in a dark jacket and light-colored, possibly beige pants, is walking quickly down the road, carrying a small child in his arms. The child is barefoot, dressed in light-colored, possibly pink pajamas. The child's limbs hang limply, a posture Jane would later describe as unsettling. At that moment, she doesn't think much of it. She assumes it's just another parent carrying their child from the evening kids club. She walks past without calling out to him. This moment would become known as the Tanner sighting and would haunt her for years to come. 9:30 p.m. Matthew Oldfield, another friend from the group, offers to check on the McCann's children along with his own, as their apartments are next to each other. He approaches apartment 5A, pushes open the door to the children's bedroom, but unlike Jerry, he doesn't go inside so as not to wake the children. He stands in the doorway listening. He thinks he hears steady breathing but doesn't see each child individually. The room seems quiet and calm. Convinced that all is well, he returns to the table and reports this to the McCanns. This incomplete check would create another fatal gap in the timeline. 10 p.m. It's Kate's turn. She enters the apartment and immediately feels a chilling sense of dread. Something is wrong. The children's bedroom door is open wider than she had left it. When she tries to close it, a gust of wind from the room slams it shut. At that moment, she notices the most important thing. The bedroom window, which was always kept closed, is wide open, and the curtain is flapping violently in the wind. She rushes to Madeleine's bed. It's empty. The pillow is askew, and Madeleine's favorite toy, a pink plush cat named Cuddle Cat, is lying on the edge. Madeleine would never have left without it. In her own horrified words, "I glanced into the room. It was dark. I was trying to see Madeleine. She should have been there. Suddenly, I realized she wasn't. I thought she might have wandered into our bedroom. Maybe she got scared. When she wasn't there, that's when the real panic started. I rushed back to the children's room, and at that moment a gust of wind blew the curtains open and I saw the shutter was up and the window was pushed open. That's when I knew. I had no doubt. Someone had taken our daughter." She runs out of the apartment, racing barefoot to the restaurant. She bursts in on her friends with a scream that will forever remain in their memory, a scream of primal terror. "She's gone. They've taken her." Chaos erupts. Friends, staff, resort guests, dozens of people rush to search. They split up, combing the area around the pool, the beach, the dark alleys behind the complex, shouting her name into the night silence. But Madeleine had vanished, dissolved into the Portuguese night, leaving no trace. In any child abduction case, the first hours are the golden hours. This is the crucial time when the trail is still fresh, and the chances of finding the child alive are highest. In the case of Madeleine McCann, these golden hours were not just missed. They were trampled by a series of stunning failures, bureaucratic confusion, and fatal incompetence. The police were not called immediately. It was only around 10:40 p.m., nearly an hour after Kate raised the alarm, that a resort manager finally called the local GNR, Guardia Nacional Republicana, the National Republican Guard. The officers who arrived were not major case investigators. They were patrolmen whose primary job was traffic control and minor offenses. They were not trained to handle abduction cases and, apparently, did not grasp the full gravity of the situation. By the time they arrived, the crime scene was hopelessly and irreversibly contaminated. Dozens of people, friends, staff, sympathetic guests, had been walking freely through apartment 5A, looking under beds and in closets. Every step they took destroyed potential evidence. Fingerprints, shoe prints, fibers from the abductor's clothing. No one secured the area. There was no crime scene tape, no roadblocks, not even a basic list of names of those who entered and exited. If the kidnapper had been among the guests or staff, he could have quietly walked away before dawn. Key procedural steps were delayed with criminal negligence. The official statements from the grief-stricken Kate and Jerry McCann were not taken until the next morning, 10 to 12 hours after the disappearance. This delay was not just unprofessional, it was ruinous. Memories, distorted by shock and panic, fade over time, and the slightest inconsistencies in their stories, caused by stress, would later be used against them. The forensic examination was conducted with flagrant violations. Crime scene photos were not taken immediately, destroying the possibility of reconstructing the exact scene for future analysis. The collection of evidence, such as DNA and fingerprints, was done carelessly and unsystematically. Some potentially important samples were lost. Others were processed using outdated methods that rendered them useless for modern analysis. Maps and diagrams of the crime scene were lost or replaced with altered versions days later. The testimony of Jane Tanner, who saw a man with a child, was initially all but ignored. The police didn't ask the right questions, didn't take her words seriously. It was only much later, when the chance to identify this man was lost, that her account became known as the Tanner sighting, perhaps the only key to the mystery, lost in the first few hours. In Portugal, there was no emergency alert system like the Amber Alert. Madeleine's photograph was not immediately distributed across the country. Border services and airports were notified with a delay. Precious hours slipped away. It was only the next morning that a more experienced unit, the PJ, Policia Judiciaria, took over the case, but by then, the damage had been done. Perhaps the most shocking failure, symbolizing the entire chaotic mess, was that just a few weeks later, apartment 5A, the place where a child had vanished, was rented out again to tourists. The crime scene was turned back into a vacation rental, erasing the last remaining traces and any hope of a re-examination. The investigation was doomed from the start, buried under a mountain of errors, missed opportunities, and mutual distrust between different police departments. When the Portuguese police, faced with a lack of evidence and mounting international pressure, began to doubt the McCann's innocence, the press, sensing blood in the water, followed their lead. What began as a national tragedy turned into one of the most brutal and merciless media trials in modern history. The McCann family found themselves at the epicenter of a hurricane of rumors, innuendos, and outright lies. At the center of this storm was Kate McCann. Her behavior was analyzed under a microscope by tabloids, TV shows, and self-proclaimed body language experts. She didn't weep on camera. She appeared composed, collected, trying to maintain her dignity in the face of an unimaginable tragedy. To many, she seemed too calm, too cold, for a mother whose child had just been abducted. Headlines screamed about her detachment, hinting at a lack of maternal instinct. Even Madeleine's stuffed toy, Cuddle Cat, which Kate constantly carried as a symbol of hope and connection to her daughter, was labeled a cynical and manipulative prop designed to elicit sympathy. The couple's decision to hire a public relations team, including former government press secretary Clarence Mitchell, backfired. Instead of appearing as desperate parents in need of help, they were perceived as calculating PR managers managing their image. This added fuel to the fire of suspicion. To the public, it looked staged or, worse, planned, critics noted. The culmination was a front-page headline in the British tabloid The Daily Express: "They did it." Without a trial, without charges, just a direct, brazen accusation delivered to a multi-million-strong audience. The McCanns sued for libel and won. The newspaper was forced to issue a public apology and pay £550,000 sterling in damages. But the damage to their reputation was already done. As their lawyer Adam Tudor said, "I would hope that newspapers will reflect very seriously on the way they have covered this story." Media expert Max Clifford called it a shot across the bows of Fleet Street that would make editors more cautious. But it was too late. Kate's personal diaries, seized by the police, mysteriously leaked to the press. Her most private thoughts, her struggle with grief and despair, were turned inside out and twisted into headlines hinting at her guilt and emotional instability. Her deep Catholic faith, her prayers for her daughter's return. All of it was perverted and presented as a cheap spectacle. The internet became a battlefield. Anonymous threats, accusations of negligence for leaving the children alone, wild conspiracy theories, all of it rained down on the family. The line between fair questioning and targeted harassment was erased. The press wasn't just reporting the story, it was judging it. The McCanns found themselves on trial in the court of public opinion, where the verdict was rendered long before all the facts were presented. Behind the scenes of the Portuguese investigation, which had quickly stalled, a dangerous and convenient assumption was brewing. The absence of clear signs of a break-in, the window was open but not broken, the lock undamaged, led some investigators to a thought. If no one came in from the outside, perhaps the tragedy happened inside. This was a theory that relieved them of the need to find an elusive kidnapper and absolved the police of some responsibility for their failure. Instead of expanding the search, the police began to narrow their focus onto the only people who were there that night: the parents. On September 7, 2007, this shift became official. Kate and Jerry McCann were declared arguidos, official suspects under Portuguese law. The world was stunned. The couple who had been at the center of a global campaign to find their daughter were now under suspicion themselves. The police put forward a theory. Madeleine had died in an accident in the apartment, perhaps from an overdose of a sedative the parents had allegedly given the children to make them sleep, and the parents, in a panic, staged the abduction to hide her body. To support this theory, specially trained sniffer dogs were brought in from the UK. The dogs allegedly signaled the presence of the scent of death in two places: behind the sofa in the living room and in the trunk of a Renault Scenic that the McCanns had rented 25 days after Madeleine's disappearance. Traces of blood and DNA were also reported to have been found in the same locations. However, this evidence was extremely dubious. The forensic data was never conclusive. The DNA samples were either too small for a precise analysis, only 19 components of Madeleine's profile, or were contaminated. The UK's leading forensic science service later stated that the results were inconclusive and could not definitively identify Madeleine. The rental car became another red flag in the public's eyes. Why would dogs detect the scent of death in a car rented almost a month after the disappearance? Jerry explained that they had transported bags of trash and the children's old clothes, including diapers, in it. But to many, this sounded unconvincing. Kate later revealed that during an 11-hour interrogation, the police put immense psychological pressure on her, offering a deal: confess to accidentally killing her daughter and hiding the body in exchange for a lenient sentence, just 2 years in prison. She refused with horror and indignation. In July of 2008, after nearly a year of public condemnation and living as suspects, this status was lifted from Kate and Jerry. The Portuguese Attorney General concluded there was insufficient evidence to press charges. The case was officially archived. For the McCanns, it was a relief, but not a victory. Their daughter was still missing, and the poisonous shadow of suspicion continued to follow them, poisoning their lives and the search for Madeleine. Despite the official clearing of their names, the McCanns understood that the Portuguese investigation had hit a dead end and would never be pursued with the necessary vigor. They were not going to give up. They continued to run their own campaign, hiring private investigators and keeping the public's interest alive through the Find Madeleine Fund, which raised millions of pounds in donations from people all over the world. In 2011, after their persistent appeals to the British government and an open letter from Jerry to Prime Minister David Cameron, Scotland Yard launched its own investigation, codenamed Operation Grange. This was an undertaking of unprecedented scale and cost. Initially, it wasn't a new search, but a complete and meticulous review of all existing materials, over 40,000 documents from Portuguese police files, private investigator reports, and thousands of international leads. At its peak, the operation involved more than 30 experienced officers, and its budget over the years exceeded £13 million, making it the most expensive missing person investigation in UK history. Operation Grange investigators reconstructed the timeline of events using modern technology, checked inconsistencies in witness statements, and pursued hundreds of previously dismissed theories. They ruled out numerous scenarios, from a robbery gone wrong to the involvement of resort staff. However, the work was fraught with enormous difficulties. Relations with the Portuguese police were tense. The Portuguese felt the British were trying to discredit their initial work and protect the McCanns. The huge expenses drew criticism in British society, where accusations of selective justice were voiced. Why was one case receiving so much attention and resources while thousands of other children remained missing? After years of painstaking work, when it seemed all leads were exhausted, a dramatic turn occurred in 2020. Working in close cooperation with German authorities, Operation Grange named a prime suspect. It wasn't someone from their circle of friends or acquaintances. It was a predator who had been hiding in plain sight all along, known to local police but somehow overlooked in the early years of the investigation. His name is Christian Bruckner. For more than a decade, the case remained cold. Then, in June of 2020, German police made a chilling announcement. They believed Madeleine was dead, and they had a prime suspect. Christian Bruckner, a German citizen, was no stranger to the criminal world. At the time of Madeleine's disappearance, he was around 30 years old and lived a transient life between Portugal and Germany, often sleeping in his battered yellow and white VW camper van. His criminal history was long and disturbing. 17 convictions for theft, robbery, drug trafficking, and, most terrifyingly, sexual offenses against children, dating back to 1994 when he was convicted for the abuse of a 6-year-old girl. In 2005, just 2 years before Madeleine vanished, Bruckner brutally raped a 72-year-old American woman in her home in Praia da Luz, the very same area where the McCanns were vacationing. This crime remained unsolved for many years until a breakthrough in DNA analysis led to him in 2019. What made him the prime suspect in Madeleine's case? Location and timing. Bruckner was living in the Algarve region in 2007. His last known address was just a few minutes' drive from the Ocean Club Resort. He was very familiar with the area. The phone call. Phone records showed that Bruckner received a 30-minute call on his mobile phone at 7:32 p.m. on May 3rd, while in the immediate vicinity of the resort. The call ended at 8:02 p.m., just half an hour before the McCanns sat down for dinner. The caller's identity is still unknown, and police believe this call may have been related to planning the crime or involved an accomplice. The alleged confession. A witness, a former friend of Bruckner's, claimed that in 2013, in a bar in Germany, while a TV program about the McCann case was on, a drunk Bruckner muttered, "She didn't scream." Criminal profile. His history of sexually abusing children, breaking into homes, and unpredictable behavior fit the profile of the kidnapper perfectly. He was a predator who preyed on the vulnerable. Suspicious behavior. The day after Madeleine's disappearance, Bruckner re-registered his other car, a Jaguar, in another person's name. This looked like a hasty attempt to get rid of potential evidence. The evidence. During searches related to other cases, USB drives with over 8,000 files of child pornography were found in Bruckner's possession, which he had hidden by burying them under the corpse of his dead dog. German prosecutors, particularly Hans Christian Wolters, made a series of bold statements, claiming they had concrete evidence that Madeleine was dead and that Bruckner was responsible. However, they admitted that this evidence was not sufficient to press murder charges. There is no body, no confession, and no direct forensic evidence linking him to apartment 5A. Bruckner, serving a long sentence in a German prison for the 2005 rape, denies any involvement and taunts the investigation. In letters to journalists, he calls himself a scapegoat and writes mockingly, When I get out, I'm going to enjoy a big steak. In 2024, he was acquitted of several other sexual assault charges due to a lack of evidence, further complicating the McCann case and putting prosecutors in a difficult position. Nearly 2 decades have passed. Madeleine McCann, if she is alive, is now a young woman. Operation Grange is still formally open, but its staff has been reduced to a few detectives. Christian Bruckner remains the prime suspect, but he has never been charged with Madeleine's abduction and murder. Searches conducted in 2023 at the Arade Reservoir, which Bruckner was rumored to have frequented, yielded no results. Every year on May 3rd, the anniversary of her disappearance, and on May 12th, her birthday, Kate and Jerry McCann publish a message. They never lose hope. "We will never stop searching the Yaike," they write. "We owe it to Madeleine, whatever the outcome may be. We still miss her dearly and are waiting." Their fund continues to collect donations, and their daughter's face, frozen at the age of 3, remains one of the most recognizable in the world. The case of Madeleine McCann became a mirror, reflecting the flaws of law enforcement systems, the cynicism of the media, and the deep-seated prejudices of society. It forced us to ask uncomfortable questions about why some tragedies receive global attention while thousands of others go unnoticed. But at the center of this storm, of all the theories and debates, remains one simple and heartbreaking truth. Parents are still searching for their child. They hold on to hope, the one thing no one has been able to take from them. The hope that one day the truth will come out, that someone, somewhere, will break years of silence. And in the meantime, the world continues to live with the echo from that Portuguese night, the echo of an empty space in a child's bed, and a question that still has no answer. Where is Madeleine McCann? Of course, here is the concluding segment for a video, including calls to action and audience engagement. This text can be used at the end of a documentary film. The story of Madeleine McCann is more than just an unsolved crime. It is an open wound on the heart of society, a reminder of the fragility of childhood and how easily a world can be turned upside down in an instant. After so many years, we are still left with questions that have no answers. And now, we want to turn to you, our viewers. What do you think about this case? Which theories seem most plausible to you? Was it a cold-blooded kidnapper like Christian Bruckner, hiding in plain sight? Was it a tragic accident that someone was desperately trying to cover up? Or does the truth lie somewhere else, in the shadows we haven't yet noticed? We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Every perspective, every analysis could shed new light on this tangled story. But more importantly, let's think together. What can we as a society do to prevent tragedies like this from ever happening again? How can we better protect our children? What lessons should we learn from the failures of the investigation, from the behavior of the media, from the reaction of the public? Perhaps it's improving security systems at resorts, raising awareness of the risks, or simply being more vigilant and responsible toward one another. Let us know what measures you believe could truly make a difference. This story has touched millions of people around the world. It has united us in a shared sense of grief and hope. We want to see just how far the echo of this story has traveled. If you, like us, are concerned with the search for the truth, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new investigations. Give this video a like if you believe that we must continue to talk about cases like this so they are never forgotten. And finally, let us know in the comments what city or country you're watching from. Let's see the geography of our community, of people who care about the fate of a little girl who simply vanished one night in May. Thank you for being with us. Until next time. In the quiet, almost primal forests of Nova Scotia, where the roots of ancient trees hold secrets deeper than any archives, a tragedy unfolded on May 2nd, 2025, that stumped even the most experienced criminologists. The disappearance of 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan from their secluded home became more than just another story of missing children. It evolved into what experts called an unprecedented and statistically impossible case, a puzzle full of contradictions, lies, and an ominous silence. This story did not begin on that fateful May day. It originated much earlier, in an isolated corner of the world where human dramas play out far from prying eyes. To understand the depth of this mystery, one must first get to know its main characters. Lilly and Jack Sullivan were children caught between two worlds. Their mother was Malaya Brooks Murray, a young woman from the Sipek Nekatik First Nation, the largest Mi'kmaq community in Nova Scotia. However, she was raising them with a man who was not their biological father. The children's biological father is a true ghost figure in this story. His name does not appear in any official reports. His existence seems to have been erased from reality. There were rumors that he was under house arrest, but even this information was unconfirmed. In a case that gained worldwide attention, the children's biological father remained a blank space, as if he had never existed. 3 years prior, Malaya met Daniel Robert Martel, a 33-year-old tall, thin man with piercing eyes. He worked at a local lumber mill, but there was a strange detail no one could explain. Daniel worked only 1 day a week. How could a man employed 1 day out of 7 support a family of 5? This question was never answered, becoming the first alarming sign in a case full of inconsistencies. Daniel lived in his childhood home on Gerlach Road in Lansdowne Station, a tiny settlement of about 100 people, many of whom had been related for generations. The place was completely isolated, a 15-minute drive to the nearest town, no cell service, just dirt roads and dense, impenetrable forests. On the same property stood his mother's old, dilapidated trailer filled with cats and a dog. All this created an atmosphere of decay and neglect that would later become the grim backdrop for the events to come. In May 2023, Malia made a life-altering decision. She moved in with Daniel, bringing Lilly, Jack, and her newborn daughter, Meadow. For a Mi'kmaq woman to leave her traditional community for an isolated white area where she would be the only indigenous person for miles around was a huge step. What made a young mother of 3 so drastically sever ties with her family and community? The answer lies in events that were never discussed publicly. Lilly and Jack started attending Salt Springs Elementary School, a small rural school with 86 students. Their bus driver, Brian Ward, remembered them well. Lilly sat on the right at the front and would let out loud screams when she was excited. "Lilly, you can't do that," Ward would constantly tell her, calling her a drama queen. Jack was a chatty little boy who might throw his boot at the driver if he couldn't get his attention. This behavior starkly contrasted with what the parents said about the children. They claimed both had undiagnosed autism and communication problems. However, their own words were full of contradictions. The mother, Malaya, "They're very talkative. They talk to everyone. They'll talk you to death." The aunt, on the biological father's side, "The children don't talk at all." The parents, in another interview, "They're not shy, but they don't talk much." How could children be very talkative, not talk at all, and not talk much all at the same time? This was just one of many mysteries in this case. The family home was a worn-out white trailer, surrounded by children's toys and car parts. Inside, in the small, shabby kitchen, children's drawings hung on the walls. In one, Lilly wrote about her mom. "My mom makes cupcakes, plays with toys, and watches movies. I love my mom." Nearby hung a red drawing of a bug made by Jack. He loved digging in the dirt for worms and flipping over pieces of wood to find insects. Just a few feet from the house, in the woods, children's toys were scattered about, creating a haunting image of childhood interrupted mid-play. The last week of April 2025 became key to this mystery. Officially, Lilly and Jack were last at school on Tuesday, April 29th. That day, Brian Ward dropped them off at the end of their dirt driveway and never saw them again. But accounts of their school attendance kept changing. First, Daniel said the children had only missed Thursday and Friday because Lilly was sick. Then he claimed they hadn't been to school all week. A teacher confirmed seeing Lilly on Monday, but after that, silence. The period of 48 to 72 hours between the last confirmed sighting of the children at school and the moment of their disappearance remains a blank spot. No one, except family members, saw the children from April 29th until the morning of May 2nd. The police never disclosed whether anyone else had contact with the children during these critical days. What happened in these lost hours? Why did the children suddenly vanish from everyone's sight except for those who lived with them in the isolated house on Gerlach Road? The morning of Friday, May 2nd, 2025, began like any other at the house on Gerlach Road, but it would soon turn into an event that defied the laws of logic and reality. According to Malia's account, she woke up around 8 a.m. and heard the children playing in the next room. "I was dozing, drifting in and out of sleep," she would later say in an interview. Malia and Daniel were in the bedroom with their 16-month-old daughter, Meadow, who, according to different versions, was either being fed or put to sleep. Daniel would later give a completely different version of the same events. According to him, Lilly came into their bedroom several times, and Jack could be heard in the kitchen. "I asked them several times to be quieter so the baby could keep sleeping," he would say. And here, the first major contradiction arises. If Malaya was dozing, drifting in and out of sleep, how could Daniel be asking the children to be quiet for a sleeping baby? Even stranger was Daniel's claim that he saw Lilly several times when she came to the doorway. He even described exactly what she was wearing. She was wearing a pink shirt. But later, in other interviews, Daniel would say words that made experts question his sanity. "I didn't see Jack that morning," but he would immediately add, "I know Jack was wearing blue boots with dinosaurs." How can you know what a child is wearing if you didn't see him? Around 8:20 a.m., according to both parents, a complete silence fell. "The next thing we knew, it was quiet," Malia would say. "As soon as I noticed I couldn't hear anything, I immediately jumped out of bed," Daniel would add. In 20 minutes, a time frame that would become key in this case, two small children allegedly performed a series of actions that violate all laws of physics and child psychology. Quiet dressing. 4-year-old Jack, in diapers, and 6-year-old Lilly, who had a cough, somehow quietly put on their outdoor clothes without waking their parents in the next room. Jack put on his blue boots with dinosaurs, and Lilly her pink ones. Any parent knows that small children cannot put on shoes silently. The backpack. Lilly found and took her white backpack with red strawberries. The silent door. The most chilling detail is the claim about the silent back door. "We can't hear when it opens," Malia would say. Daniel would confirm, "The door is practically silent when you try to open it." For a family with small children to have a back door that is impossible to hear when opened seems incredibly dangerous and, in certain circumstances, convenient. A change in habits. Even more strangely, the children usually left this door wide open, and Daniel constantly had to remind them to close it. But on the morning they disappeared, the children allegedly closed the door neatly behind them, behavior completely contrary to their usual habits. Overcoming the fence. The yard was fenced, which created an additional obstacle. A 4-year-old and a 6-year-old would have had to climb over the fence, a task that is physically almost impossible for children of that age without assistance. Vanishing into the woods. And finally, they dissolved into the woods as completely as if the earth itself had swallowed them. When the parents realized the children were gone, their reactions were as contradictory as the rest of the story. Daniel claims he immediately searched the house and the backyard because the children often looked for bugs and grass for the chickens. Not finding them, he jumped in his car and started driving along all the nearby dirt roads and drainage ditches. Meanwhile, Malia stayed home and called 911. But this is where the timeline becomes murky and frightening. Officially, the 911 call was made around 10:00 a.m. However, one police dispatch report mentioned that Daniel had reported the children missing at 9:40 a.m., stating they had disappeared around 8:00 a.m. This hour-long discrepancy was never explained and creates a chilling hole in the timeline. What was happening during these lost hours? Why did the parents wait so long before calling for help? By Friday evening, tension among family members reached a boiling point. A fight broke out in the yard between the mother's relatives and Daniel. "My mother had to kick some people off the property because they were saying that I did it, and I'm the only one here fighting for them, which is sad," Daniel said. But the most shocking turn of events happened the next day. Malia Brooks Murray and Daniel Martell went to a briefing at the search and rescue headquarters. According to Daniel, Malia suddenly left the briefing in the middle of the presentation and sat in an ambulance. Then she left with her mother, taking 16-month-old Meadow with her. "I haven't seen or heard from her since," Daniel would say. Just 24 hours after the children disappeared, their family completely and publicly fell apart. Even more alarming was the immediate involvement of Child Protective Services, CPS. Daniel went to the CPS office in Stellarton to see his daughter Meadow, but was denied access. "At this point, I can't be around Meadow," he explained. For a man who claimed to have nothing to do with the disappearance of his stepchildren, being immediately denied access to his own biological daughter seemed an extremely harsh and telling measure. On May 7, 2025, Staff Sergeant Curtis McKinnon stood before reporters and uttered words that sent a chill down everyone's spine. "The probability of survival is extremely low." After 6 days of searching, involving more than 160 people daily, after search dogs, thermal imaging drones, helicopters, and dive teams had scoured every inch of the dense woods around Gerlach Road, the Nova Scotia police announced they were scaling back the active search. But the most terrifying part of McKinnon's statement was an admission that changed the nature of the entire case. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, Major Crime Unit has been involved in the investigation since May 3rd. On the third day, just 24 hours after Lilly and Jack had allegedly gone out to play, homicide detectives were already digging into the case. In a typical missing child case, the Major Crime Unit is not brought in so quickly unless something screams murder from the very beginning. By Thursday, May 8th, the RCMP Command Center had disappeared as suddenly as the children themselves. All that remained was a scrap of yellow warning tape, a few portable toilets, and tire tracks. The symbolism was horrifying. A massive life-saving operation had turned into a crime scene overnight. It was then that major crime investigators came for Daniel Martel. They arrived at his dilapidated mobile home to seize electronic devices to verify timelines. Earlier that day, an RCMP helicopter had flown over the family property, scanning the area. Daniel underwent a lengthy interrogation with detectives, meticulously recounting the events of that morning. "They searched every rock, every root, everything," he told reporters. "I gave them every detail, everything from my bank statements to all the information from my Google Maps." But the most dramatic moment was Daniel's unexpected request for a polygraph test. "I asked for it myself," he declared. "I want to clear up all the doubts, not just for the people online making crazy accusations, but for everyone." The RCMP refused to confirm whether a test would be conducted, citing the need to maintain the integrity of the investigation. But the very fact that Daniel publicly requested a test that most people fear made experts wonder, what did he know that others didn't? The parents' behavior and language became the subject of intense scrutiny. Just 24 hours after the disappearance, Malaya used words typically associated with grief for the dead. "We are all filled with pain and sorrow." The word sorrow is usually used to describe mourning, not to express hope for the return of missing children. Daniel also began speaking about the children in the past tense. Jack just loved bugs and dinosaurs. Lilly loved girly things. This is a standard red flag in such investigations. Even more disturbing was how Daniel described the children in the context of a kidnapping. Instead of emotional pleas for their return, he explained how easily they could have been taken. "They're easy to take. If they'd made it to the road, they would have gotten into any car if offered food, water, or even candy." When the search resumed on May 17th, Daniel's language became even more revealing. "I really hope they find something," he said. Using the word something instead of them was an alarming signal. Investigators search for children. Criminals search for something, evidence. In another statement, he said, "The main goal here is just to find the truth." Again, not to find the children, but to find the truth. This linguistic cat-and-mouse game was happening against a backdrop of increasingly bizarre behavior. Daniel described his heroic efforts on the first day. "I was running through waist-deep water, screaming until my throat was sore. I was ahead of the helicopters and drones." But in all his interviews, he appeared clean, calm, and showed no signs of the physical exertion he described. The search operation was unprecedented in its scale. Over 160 people daily scoured 5.5 square kilometers of dense forest. Helicopters, drones, dogs. The conditions were nightmarish. The landscape was littered with trees felled by Hurricane Fiona, forcing searchers to either climb over them or crawl under them. Added to this was the peak of tick season. "Yesterday, we found fresh bear tracks. This is the Nova Scotia woods," said one of the search managers. On the fourth day of the search, the only significant discovery was made. Searchers reported finding what looked like a child's footprint. This gave the first real hope that the children had indeed gone into the woods. But the single possible footprint quickly led nowhere. The most chilling aspect of the search was the complete absence of any trace of the children. Lilly's white backpack with red strawberries, which Daniel claimed should have been highly visible, was never found. Jack's blue boots with dinosaurs, Lilly's pink boots, Jack's diapers, nothing. However, strange items were found that added a sinister note to the already grim picture. Searchers discovered a pink blanket, shirts, and a water bottle in the woods. When police showed photos of these items to Daniel, he said none of them belonged to Lilly or Jack. In an area where no other children lived nearby, the presence of these foreign children's items raised disturbing questions. Who left them there, and when? As the case stalled, various theories began to emerge. The official version, which no one believed, the children got lost. Experts pointed to numerous problems with this theory. Children of that age rarely wander so far, and the complete lack of a trail was statistically impossible. Kidnapping, Daniel's version. Daniel publicly promoted the kidnapping theory, calling for the search area to be expanded to provincial borders and airports, but police stated there was no evidence of a kidnapping, and no Amber Alert was issued. An accident. Some suggested the children might have drowned or had another accident. This would explain the underwater searches, but not the complete absence of bodies or belongings. The darkest theory. The children were killed by a family member. The early involvement of the homicide unit, the parents' strange behavior, and numerous contradictions all pointed to this version. One of the most telling moments occurred on May 13th. In a press release, the police corrected the spelling of Lilly's name from Lily to Lilly. This seemingly minor fact was actually deeply frightening. After 11 days of intensive investigation, after thousands of hours of searching, the police still did not know how to spell the missing child's name correctly. This spoke to a fundamental breakdown in communication between the family and investigators. The cover-up hypothesis. Was Daniel protecting Malaya? Against this backdrop, a new, complex hypothesis began to take shape, one that could explain many of the inconsistencies. Daniel Martel was not the main villain, but was merely covering for the real culprit, Malaya. Proponents of this theory point to several key moments. Malaya's mental state. Malaya was a young mother of 3, cut off from her community, living in isolation, and possibly suffering from postpartum depression or other psychological issues. There were rumors of an unstable home environment. What if something snapped that morning? In a fit of anger, despair, or a dissociative state, she could have harmed the children, perhaps unintentionally. The paralyzed witness. Daniel, upon entering the house, could have discovered a horrific scene, and at that moment, instead of calling the police, he chose to protect the woman he loved. His silence was not complicity, but paralysis from fear and shock. Together, they could have concocted the story of the silent door and the walk in the woods. The mother's arrival as a catalyst. This fragile pact of silence crumbled when Malaya's mother arrived on the afternoon of May 2nd. With her appearance, Malaya completely cut off contact with Daniel and the outside world. Feeling abandoned and left to face the investigation alone, Daniel began to change his tactics. He started leaking messages to the press, accusing Malaya of negligence, claiming the children were wild under her care. It was a sharp reversal from the man who had begged people not to attack her. Perhaps it was a desperate attempt at self-preservation. Linguistic mimicry. In early interviews, Daniel repeated Malaya's phrases almost verbatim. This could have been a sign of a prearranged story. His constant use of we realized it was quiet, blurred personal responsibility. This theory paints a picture not of a cold-blooded killer, but of a man trapped by love, fear, and emotional dependency. He might have been unable to see Malaya as a threat, even if the facts screamed it. Weeks turned into months. The case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan became what experts called a black hole of criminology. Every aspect of it violated established patterns. Involvement of the homicide unit on the 3rd day, a 48-hour gap in sightings before the disappearance, contradictory medical diagnoses of the children, the story of the silent door, and 20 minutes of impossible actions. The family's collapse within 24 hours, a complete lack of a trail despite massive searches. Strange items in the woods not belonging to the children. Linguistic anomalies in the parents' language. In Lansdowne Station, pink ribbons still flutter on the tree branches, a symbol of hope. The bus driver, Brian Ward, still drives past the white trailer, and the children on the bus ask, "Have they found Jack and Lilly?" "Not yet," he replies. Their seat at the front right is empty, but their name tags still hang above it. In the kitchen of the empty house, children's drawings are yellowing on the walls. The mystery remains unsolved. Did the children disappear into the dense forests of Nova Scotia, or did they disappear into a labyrinth of lies, fear, and family secrets? One thing becomes increasingly clear. In the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, reality itself has become a suspect. The children didn't just go missing. They dissolved into an anomaly so deep that it challenged the most basic laws of physics and logic. And while experts continue to call this case unprecedented and loved ones pray for a miracle, the answer to the question, what happened to Lilly and Jack Sullivan on the morning of May 2nd, 2025, is buried somewhere out there, either under the roots of old trees or in the contradictory testimonies of the 2 people who were the last to see them. And perhaps the truth will never be found, remaining just another ghost wandering the silent forests of Nova Scotia. When the initial shock of the children's disappearance gave way to cold analysis, the investigation turned into a dissection of lies. Every statement made by the parents crumbled under scrutiny, revealing gaping holes in their narrative. These weren't just minor inaccuracies common for people under stress. This was a system of contradictions so fundamental that they pointed to a carefully constructed but poorly thought out fabrication. Contradiction number 1. The fatal lost hour. The most glaring inconsistency was the timeline of the morning of May 2nd. The official 911 call was made around 10 o'clock a.m. However, as was later revealed from dispatch logs, Daniel had reported the children missing at 9:40 a.m., stating they had disappeared around 8 a.m. This creates a lost hour, or more, between the moment the parents allegedly panicked and the moment they officially called for help. In the world of missing children, every moment counts. Professional investigators know that the first few hours are the most critical. What were Malaya and Daniel doing during this time? Daniel claims he single-handedly searched 20 acres of forest. This is a physically grueling task that should have left him dirty, exhausted, and wet. However, everyone who saw him that day described him as calm and clean. Moreover, Malaya's behavior is even more inexplicable. If her partner is frantically running through the woods, why is she staying in the house? Why isn't she running to the neighbors, screaming, seeking help from anyone she can find in this isolated area? Instead, she waits. This waiting is not passive in action. It is an active choice that demands an explanation. This lost hour is not just a hole in time, it is a black hole where the truth of what happened to Lilly and Jack most likely lies. Contradiction number 2, the on-demand diagnosis. The parents' description of their children was like a psychological chameleon, changing color depending on who was asking the questions and when. The claim of undiagnosed autism and communication problems served as a convenient explanation for why the children might have wandered off and not responded to calls. This created an image of vulnerable, disoriented children lost in the woods. However, this version collapsed under the weight of their own words and the testimony of others. The bus driver described them as active, loud, and sociable, the complete opposite of autistic behavior. Malaya herself, in one of her very first interviews, enthusiastically stated, "They're very talkative. They talk to everyone. They'll talk you to death." This is not a description of children with communication problems. So, who were Lilly and Jack? Shy introverts with autism or chatty extroverts? The answer is likely that their personalities were tailored to fit the needs of the narrative at any given moment. When it was necessary to explain why they might have left, they became problematic. When it was necessary to evoke sympathy, they became sweet kids who will talk to anyone. This flexibility in describing their own children is one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. Contradiction number 3. The physics of the impossible. The story of how the children left the house violates not only logic, but also the laws of physics. The silent door. In an old, worn-out trailer, there are practically no silent sliding doors. Moreover, the claim that the children, who usually left it wide open, this time closed it neatly and silently behind them, sounds like an outright fabrication. Dressing. Anyone with small children knows that the process of putting on outdoor shoes is a noisy and chaotic affair. To imagine that 2 children, age 4 and 6, were able to quietly get dressed and put on their shoes while their parents were dozing in the next room is practically impossible. The fence. The fenced yard was another obstacle. How did 2 small children manage to get over it without help? This question was never answered. Every detail of this story, from the silent door to the neatly closed latch, seems to have been invented for one purpose: to create the appearance that the children left on their own, while all the evidence indicated they could not have done so. The Silent Suspect, a psychological portrait of Malaya Brooks Murray. At the center of this storm of silence stands Malaya. Her behavior after the children's disappearance was so atypical for a grieving mother that it became a major clue in itself. Her departure from her native Mi'kmaq community was the first step into isolation. She traded the support of a large family and cultural community for a solitary life in a trailer with a man who barely worked. What made her take this step? Was it an escape from something or to something? The answer to this question could be the key to her psychology. Her public statements were rare, but extremely revealing. The use of the word sorrow instead of worry or fear was a linguistic slip that did not go unnoticed by statement analysis experts. Sorrow is an emotion associated with irreversible loss. Her subconscious may have already known what her conscious mind was trying to hide. Then came her sudden and complete disappearance from the public eye after her mother's arrival. She stopped responding to messages from the children's paternal grandmother, blocked Daniel, and completely handed over control of the situation to her mother. This move can be interpreted in different ways. Perhaps she was broken by grief and needed her mother's protection. But a more sinister interpretation is that her mother arrived to take control of a situation that was spiraling out of control and to make Malaya be quiet to avoid saying too much. While Daniel was giving interviews, crying on camera, and participating in the public drama, Malaya remained silent. This silence was deafening. In most cases of missing children, parents use every opportunity to appeal to the public, to potential abductors, to keep the story in the news. Malaya's silence was not just an absence of words. It was an active refusal to participate in the search for her own children. Protector or accomplice? An analysis of Daniel Martel's behavior. Daniel's role in this drama is the most complex and multifaceted. He was the public face of the tragedy, but his actions and words raised more questions than answers. The economic riddle. His employment, 1 day a week, is not just a biographical detail. It is a central mystery. How did a family of 5 survive on a 1 day a week salary? This question was never asked directly in interviews, but it hung in the air. Did he have other unofficial sources of income? Rumors of strange activity and frequent visitors to their isolated homes circulated in local online communities. Although Daniel denied hosting parties, the question of his financial situation remains open and could point to a hidden side of their life that might have been a catalyst for the tragedy. Linguistic self-sabotage. As mentioned, his language was full of red flags. The use of the past tense, the focus on his own suffering, my throat was sore, rather than on the children, replacing the word children with something or truth. These are all classic signs of deception in statement analysis. He spoke like a person who knows the children will not be found alive and is trying to create an image of both a victim and a hero. The dramatic reversal. The turning point was the arrival of Malaya's mother. Until that moment, Daniel and Malaya seemed to be sticking to a single story. Afterward, their fragile alliance collapsed. Daniel's campaign of leaking compromising messages about Malaya looked like a desperate attempt to shift blame. It was as if he were saying, if I go down, I'm taking her with me. Or perhaps he was trying to create an image of himself as a victim of her negligence to secure custody of their shared daughter, Meadow. His public pleas to not attack Malaya seemed hypocritical in light of his behind-the-scenes actions. He defended her in public while stabbing her in the back. The scale of the search operation was enormous, but its result was zero, and this is perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence of all. Search and rescue experts agree. 2 small children, especially in terrain as difficult as the post-Hurricane Nova Scotia woods, cannot disappear without a trace. They would have left clues, scraps of clothing, footprints, discarded toys, broken branches. Lilly's backpack, which Daniel said was bright and noticeable, should have been found. Jack's diapers, another item that would have been hard to miss. The complete absence of any physical evidence belonging to the children can mean only one thing. The children were never in that forest. The searchers were looking for living or deceased children who had wandered from home. But what if they were looking in the wrong place? What if the tragedy occurred inside or near the house, and the story of the walk in the woods was just a smokescreen, designed to send hundreds of people on a wild goose chase while the real culprits had time to hide the evidence? The strange items found in the woods, the pink blanket, shirts, a bottle, that did not belong to the children only deepen the mystery. Were they planted to confuse the investigation? Or did they indicate that something more than just family life was happening in this isolated corner? For the small, tight-knit community of Lansdowne Station, the children's disappearance was a trauma comparable to an industrial disaster. Everyone knew everyone. Neighbors had watched Lilly and Jack grow up. The bus driver waited for them at the stop every day. Immediately after the disappearance, the community rallied. People organized candlelight vigils, brought stuffed animals, and helped with the search. But as the parents' story began to unravel, solidarity was replaced by suspicion and fear. Social media became a boiling pot of theories, accusations, and speculation. Fingers were pointed at Daniel, at Malaya, at their relatives. The situation became so heated that lawyers had to publicly warn people about the legal consequences of slander and cyberbullying. The atmosphere in the town became oppressive. People started locking their doors, looking at their neighbors with suspicion. The story of two missing children turned into a story of how one family can poison an entire community with fear and distrust. The innocence of this quiet corner was lost forever. The case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan is not just a mystery. It is a tragedy built on a foundation of silence. All the evidence, from the contradictory testimonies to the failed searches, points inward to the two adults who were in the house that morning. What really happened? There is no definitive answer, but the most likely scenario is pieced together from fragments of lies and strange behavior. Perhaps that morning, in a state of affect, stress, or a psychological breakdown, Malia harmed the children. Perhaps it was an accident she couldn't handle, a fall, a blow. Daniel, discovering this, chose the path of concealment instead of doing the right thing. Together, they invented a story that they thought was plausible but that couldn't stand up to scrutiny. They staged a disappearance. While hundreds of volunteers and police officers were combing the woods for children who were never there, the real evidence could have been destroyed. The children's bodies, if they died, could have been hidden in a completely different place, far from the search area. The case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan will remain in the history of criminology as an example of how human psychology can be more complex than any detective novel. It is a story of how love can turn into a toxic dependency, and how the fear of consequences can outweigh the value of truth and justice. And as the pink ribbons flutter in the wind, as children's drawings hang on the walls of an empty house, and as the invisible shadows of two small passengers lie on the bus seat, the main question remains unanswered. Not where are Lilly and Jack, but when will those who know the truth finally speak? But with each passing day of silence, that hope fades, leaving behind only a cold, bitter void and a mystery that may never be solved. As the official investigation shifted from an active phase to a quiet, methodical siege, another, no less fierce battle came to the forefront: the War of the Families. On one side was Malaya's family, the Brooks-Murray clan, which built an impenetrable wall of silence around itself. Led by Malaya's mother, they became an unbreachable fortress. No comments to the press, no contact with Daniel's family, no public appeals. Their strategy was clear: a complete information vacuum. This silence was so absolute that it looked like an admission of guilt, or, at least, an admission that they had something to hide. On the other side was the Martel clan and their allies. They chose the opposite tactic: public defense and counterattack. They were active on social media, gave interviews to local bloggers, and defended Daniel. The most striking episode of this war was a now-deleted Facebook livestream hosted by Daniel's cousin. In an emotional, rambling speech, she fiercely defended her brother, calling him a broken man who has lost everything. But then, she went on the offensive, unleashing a barrage of accusations against Malaya and her family. She claimed Malaya was unstable, that she neglected the children, and that her family was now hiding her to cover up the truth. This live stream was a bombshell. It divided an already fractured public opinion into two warring camps. Some saw it as confirmation of Malia's guilt. Others saw it as a clumsy and desperate attempt by the Martel family to deflect suspicion from Daniel. For investigators, however, it was invaluable material. A public conflict of this magnitude often leads to the parties in their efforts to slander each other, unconsciously revealing details they were trying to hide. Every accusation, every denial was carefully analyzed. The War of the Families turned this case from a mystery of two people into a public drama where every participant could become a key to the solution. The early involvement of the Major Crime Unit meant that the police never believed the story of lost children from the start. Their strategy was fundamentally different from a search and rescue operation. They weren't looking for children in the woods, they were looking for a crack in the wall of lies that Daniel and Malaya had built. The psychological vice. Investigators began to apply the classic psychological vice tactic. Daniel and Malaya, while she was available, were interrogated separately, asked the same questions in a different order, trying to catch them in the slightest discrepancies in details. They knew very well that even the most rehearsed lie has weak spots. The waiting game. After Malaya took refuge behind her family's wall of silence, all the pressure shifted to Daniel. He became the only weak link. Investigators continued to maintain contact with him, creating an illusion of cooperation. They let him talk, give interviews, knowing that the more a person talks, the higher the probability that he will slip up. His public appearances were not just a cry from the soul. They were part of the police strategy. They let him talk so that he would bury himself under the weight of his own contradictions. Digital ghosts. In 2025, even in the wilderness without cell service, people leave digital footprints. The police seized all of Daniel's electronic devices. His statement that he provided his Google Maps data was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, he was demonstrating openness. On the other, he gave investigators a map of his movements. They could compare his story of heroic searches with the actual GPS tracks. Was he really where he said he was? Or was his phone during the lost hour at home or moving along a route leading to a completely different place, perhaps to where the evidence was hidden? Search queries, correspondence, and social media activity were analyzed. Did the parents search for information on how to dispose of a body, the legal consequences, or methods of concealment? The absence of such activity would also be telling. But even more telling was Malea's digital silence. In the modern world, a complete withdrawal from digital communication after such a tragedy is suspicious in itself. This is not the behavior of a grieving mother seeking support. It is the behavior of a person who is afraid to leave a trail. Criminologists who analyzed this case consistently emphasized its uniqueness. It did not fit any known pattern. Comparison with the Casey Anthony case. Casey Anthony lied for weeks while her daughter was considered missing. But eventually, a body was found, and the investigation focused on physical evidence. In the Sullivan case, there was nothing. No bodies, no evidence, no crime scene. Comparison with the Susan Smith case. Susan Smith invented a story about a carjacker but eventually broke under pressure and confessed, pointing to the place where she had drowned her car with her children inside. In the Sullivan case, there was no confession, no remorse, only staunch denial and a wall of silence. The uniqueness of the Lilly and Jack case lay in the absolute vacuum. A crime without a crime scene, a disappearance without a trace. It was like a magician's trick, only instead of a rabbit from a hat, 2 living children disappeared. This emptiness was the most terrifying piece of evidence because it pointed to a carefully planned, almost perfect concealment that could only have been carried out by those who had time, knowledge of the area, and the strongest motive to hide something terrible that had happened within the walls of their own home. Months passed. The media noise subsided. The television vans left. The RCMP command center became a distant memory. But for Lansdowne Station, the tragedy did not end. It simply entered a chronic phase, becoming an unhealing scar on the face of the community. The house on Gerlach Road became a local landmark of horror. Cars would drive by slowly, people staring at the abandoned trailer where children's drawings still hung on the walls and toys rusted in the yard. The house transformed from a family nest into a mausoleum of an unsolved mystery. Did anyone live there? Did Daniel ever show up? The rumors varied. Brian Ward, the bus driver, continued his route. But every time he passed the turnoff to Gerlach Road, he felt a chill. The empty seat became an eternal reminder for him. The children on the bus stopped asking about Lilly and Jack. Their names became something of a local taboo, a sad story that adults told in whispers. Daniel Martel, according to some reports, continued to live in the area, periodically appearing online with statements of his innocence and love for the children, but he became an outcast, a person looked upon with suspicion and fear. His life, as he had said, was destroyed. But the question of whether he was the architect of that destruction remained open. Malaya Brooks Murray and her daughter Meadow vanished. They disappeared from Nova Scotia as completely as Lilly and Jack had disappeared from their home. Sheltered by her family, they likely started a new life somewhere far away. But can you start a new life when such a shadow follows you? For the investigation, the case went cold. This does not mean it was forgotten. It means it sits on a shelf, waiting for that one piece of evidence, that one phone call, that one confession that might come in a year, 5 or 20. The police are waiting for one of the keepers of the secret to no longer be able to live with the burden. In the end, the story of Lilly and Jack Sullivan became a dark parable about how the most terrible evil is not the monster that hides in the woods, but the silence that settles in a home. It is a story about how the absence of answers can be more agonizing than the most terrible truth. And, until this silence is broken, the souls of two small children will remain hostage to lies, and their pink ribbons will continue to fade in the wind like a hope that is slowly dying. At the center of this tangled drama, like a quiet, almost invisible anchor, was the third child, Meadow, the 16-month-old daughter of Daniel and Malia. Her existence is not just an additional detail. It is possibly the fundamental motive explaining the initial pact of silence between the parents. For investigators and psychologists, the presence of a shared biological child in a couple whose other children have disappeared under suspicious circumstances changes the entire dynamic. Lilly and Jack were Daniel's stepchildren. Meadow was his flesh and blood. For Malia, Meadow was the only child connecting her to Daniel. This created a powerful, albeit toxic, bond. In the first hours after realizing the tragedy, whether it was the result of malicious intent or a monstrous accident, the main goal for Daniel and Malia may not have been justice for Lilly and Jack, but the preservation of Meadow. The threat of CPS intervention was not just likely, it was inevitable. In the eyes of the law, they were two adults under whose care two children had disappeared. Any admission of negligence, let alone something worse, would have meant the immediate and most likely permanent removal of Meadow from the family. Thus, the story of the walk in the woods was not just a lie to avoid prison. It was a desperate, hastily constructed raft on which they were trying to save their last family tie, their shared daughter. The initial unity of their testimonies, the linguistic mimicry, the use of we, all of this could have been dictated by this common primal fear of losing Meadow. They created a united front not out of love for each other, but out of love, or a sense of ownership, for their only shared child. It is in this context that the subsequent collapse of their union becomes perfectly logical. When Malia's mother took her away with Meadow, Daniel lost everything. He lost not only Malia and the illusion of a family, but also, most importantly, access to his daughter. At that moment, the pact of silence lost all meaning for him. His motivation shifted from preserving the family to personal survival and the fight for his daughter. His attacks on Malia, his attempts to portray himself as a victim of her negligence, all of this can be seen as preparation for a future custody battle. He was trying to prove to the system that he was the good parent and she was the bad one, and therefore Meadow should be with him. The tragedy of Meadow is that she became not only a witness, albeit an unconscious one, to the disappearance of her brother and sister, but also a pawn in a brutal game of survival between her parents. Daniel's statement that he voluntarily took a polygraph test and that its results were good in my favor is one of the most revealing moments in this entire story. To the layperson, this sounds like convincing proof of innocence. To an experienced investigator or criminal psychologist, it is a classic maneuver that says a lot, but not about the truth. First, a polygraph is not a lie detector. It is a device that measures physiological responses, pulse, breathing, perspiration, to the stress caused by questions. The results can be wrong. They can be cheated, especially by psychopaths who feel no empathy or stress. And they are not admissible as direct evidence in court in most jurisdictions, including Canada. Second, the psychology of this move is more complex than it seems. Innocent people often fear the polygraph because they are afraid their nervousness will be misinterpreted as lying. Guilty people, especially those with narcissistic traits, often volunteer for the test. Why? Creating an illusion of cooperation. It is a powerful move to show the investigation and the public. I have nothing to hide. I am willing to do anything to prove my innocence. Confidence in their ability to deceive. Some criminals believe they can beat the machine by controlling their reactions. A bluff. Sometimes it is just a bluff, hoping that the police, seeing such willingness, will either not conduct the test or will treat its results less critically. Daniel's own phrasing, "I don't know if I can share these results, but they were good in my favor. Let's just say that," is a masterpiece of evasion. He provides no evidence. He alludes to some confidentiality that most likely does not exist. He creates an aura of mystery and confirmed innocence without having anything but his own words. And most importantly, the RCMP never confirmed the fact of the test or its results. In a case of such high profile, if a key suspect were completely cleared by a polygraph, the police would likely have made an official, albeit cautious, statement to narrow the search. Their silence on this matter speaks louder than any of Daniel's words. His polygraph gambit was most likely a desperate attempt to manipulate public opinion and strengthen his position in the unfolding war with Malia's family. Behind the dramatic confrontation of the Martel and Brooks Murray clans, The most tragic figures in this story, besides the children themselves, were almost overlooked, the relatives on the side of Lilly and Jack's biological father. They were deprived not only of the children but also of the right to information, the right to grieve, and the right to participate. The children's paternal grandmother was one of the first to raise the alarm and actively communicate with the press. But after Malaya fell under her mother's influence, she was simply cut off. Messages went unanswered, calls were ignored. She found herself in a monstrous situation. Her grandchildren were missing, and the woman who was the last to see them refused to speak to her. Her pain was genuine. There was no calculation in her words, no attempts to manipulate. There was only a desperate desire to know what had happened to her grandchildren. Her voice is the voice of real, unfeigned grief, which starkly contrasts with Daniel's rehearsed and contradictory statements and Malaya's icy silence. The exclusion of this part of the family from the information field is another important clue. If a kidnapping or an accident had occurred, the natural reaction would have been for the entire family to unite, regardless of past disagreements. The isolation of the relatives on the biological father's side was a conscious decision, most likely made to limit the number of people who could ask uncomfortable questions and notice inconsistencies in their story. It was another step toward creating an information vacuum around the truth. Over time, the main question arises: why has no one broken? Why, despite the pressure, suspicion, and ruined lives, does the code of silence remain unbreakable? Psychologists can offer several explanations that likely work in combination. Mutually assured destruction. If both Daniel and Malaya are involved, he as a concealer, she as the culprit, or both as perpetrators of negligence that led to the tragedy, then each of them has information that can destroy the other. A confession from one would immediately lead to the exposure of the other. In this stalemate, silence is the only survival strategy. The sunk cost fallacy. They have invested too much in their lie. They have survived the initial interrogations, public condemnation, and the family's collapse. To confess now would be to devalue all that suffering and guarantee a harsh punishment. Continuing to lie, however difficult, may seem psychologically less costly than admitting the truth and facing the consequences. Creating a new reality. The human psyche has powerful defense mechanisms. Perhaps over time, by constantly repeating their story, they themselves have begun to believe it on some level. A lie repeated 1,000 times can begin to feel like the truth, displacing the traumatic memories of what really happened. This unbreakable code of silence is the biggest obstacle to justice. Without bodies, without direct evidence, without a confession, the case is doomed to remain in the category of unsolved. Investigators may be 99% sure of what happened, but that last 1%, the provable truth, eludes them, locked in the minds of two people who chose to bury it, along with their children. The case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan went beyond a typical criminal investigation, touching on deep and painful themes in Canadian society. It became a mirror reflecting the problems of rural poverty, intercultural tension, and systemic failures in child protection services. The Clash of Two Worlds. The story of Malaya, a woman from a First Nation community who moved to an isolated white area, was not unique, but in the context of this case, it acquired a tragic significance. This move, which cut her off from her support system, traditions, and family, made her extremely vulnerable. For decades, Canada has been grappling with the problem of a disproportionately high number of missing and murdered Indigenous women and children. The Sullivan case, although not fitting the typical scenario, unwittingly fell onto this painful map. It raised uncomfortable questions. Would Malaya have received adequate psychological support if she had stayed in her community? Was her mental state the result of personal problems or a consequence of cultural isolation and stress? Some Indigenous rights advocates cautiously suggested that the case might have developed differently if it had been investigated with consideration for the cultural specifics and traumas faced by Indigenous communities. Her family's wall of silence might not only have been a way to hide guilt, but also a manifestation of deep distrust in the white justice system, which has historically failed them. Invisible poverty. The picture of the family's life. A dilapidated trailer, working one day a week, rumors of questionable activities, is a portrait of hidden rural poverty. Far from urban centers with access to social services, psychologists, and support groups, families like the Sullivan Martells are often left to face their problems alone. Their isolation was not only geographical but also social. This poverty could have been a catalyst for the tragedy. Constant financial stress, lack of prospects, and living in cramped and squalid conditions all create a breeding ground for domestic conflict, depression, and child neglect. The tragedy of Lilly and Jack is perhaps not just a story of two bad parents, but a story of how a system designed to protect the most vulnerable fails to notice them until it is too late. Where were the social services before May 2, 2025? Did teachers at the school notice signs of problems in the family? These questions remain unanswered, but they point to a systemic failure that became the backdrop for a personal tragedy. From a legal standpoint, the case has reached a dead end. Without new evidence, the prosecution cannot press charges, but this does not mean the work has stopped. Cold cases have a way of sometimes heating up in the most unexpected ways. What could be such a catalyst? A technological breakthrough. With the development of DNA technologies and forensic analysis methods, a piece of evidence that seems useless today could become decisive in 10 years. Perhaps a microscopic trace was preserved on one of the foreign items found in the woods, which could be linked to one of the participants in the future. The human factor. This is the greatest hope. Over time, relationships change. Alliances fall apart. Guilt can become unbearable. Someone in the circle of those who know, perhaps not Daniel or Malaya themselves, but one of their relatives to whom they confided, may decide to speak. It could be a deathbed confession, an anonymous phone call, or simply a moment of weakness when the burden of the secret becomes too heavy. A chance discovery. The forests of Nova Scotia are vast. Perhaps many years from now, a hunter, a logger, or a hiker will accidentally stumble upon what hundreds of searchers could not find: the remains of the children or items that were hidden far from the initial search area. Such a discovery would immediately turn the case from cold to hot. The police know that in such cases, time can be an ally. They wait patiently. They periodically review the materials, recheck testimonies, and monitor the lives of the key figures. They are waiting for a crack in the wall of silence. What will remain of the story of Lilly and Jack Sullivan? A few pink ribbons faded in the sun. Thousands of pages of police reports gathering dust in an archive. A grim Wikipedia page dedicated to unsolved crimes. But its main legacy is emptiness. This case is a prime example of how the absence of evidence can sometimes be the strongest evidence. The absence of a trail in the woods proves the children were not there. The absence of signs of a break-in proves the enemy was within. The absence of genuine grief from the parents proves they knew more than they were saying. The story of Lilly and Jack has become a grim textbook case for criminologists, psychologists, and social workers. It showed how easily a large-scale search operation can be manipulated by sending it on a false trail. It demonstrated the power of family pacts of silence and the depth of the human capacity for self-deception and concealment. And perhaps the most tragic irony is that Lilly and Jack, who were almost invisible to the system during their lives, became world famous after their disappearance. Their faces were on television screens, their story discussed by millions of people. But this posthumous fame did not bring them justice. They remain frozen in time. A 6-year-old girl who loved cupcakes and screamed with delight, and a 4-year-old boy who loved digging in the dirt for bugs. They did not disappear in the woods. They disappeared in the silence. In the silence of a shabby trailer on Gerlach Road, in the silence between two adults who knew the truth, and in the deafening silence that followed. And this silence is the most terrifying sound in the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, a sound that will echo through the forests of Nova Scotia for years to come. When the smoke cleared and the adrenaline of the first few days wore off, the most difficult phase began for those responsible for the disappearance of Lilly and Jack, living inside the lie. This is not just a daily repetition of a fabricated story. It is the meticulous construction and maintenance of an entire psychological fortress, an architecture of denial that protects the consciousness from an unbearable truth. The walls of the fortress, the first and thickest layer of defense, is the dehumanization of the victims. To live with the thought of what one has done, the guilty party must subconsciously diminish the value of those they have harmed. Perhaps in the minds of Malaya and Daniel, Lilly and Jack ceased to be their beloved, laughing children and became a problem, a source of stress, difficult children with autism. This transformation, which began even before the tragedy, allowed them to emotionally distance themselves. When Daniel spoke of them in the past tense, it was not just a linguistic slip. It was an act of psychological alienation. The second layer is the projection of guilt. Instead of accepting responsibility, the psyche looks for culprits outside. Daniel accused Malia of negligence. Malaya, taking refuge behind silence, may have accused Daniel of pressure or lack of support. Both could blame external circumstances: poverty, isolation, lack of help. They could even blame the children themselves, considering them unmanageable. This projection creates the illusion that they themselves are victims, not perpetrators. The third, thinnest but most important layer is the normalization of the new reality. Life goes on. One must eat, sleep, pay bills. Over time, the brain adapts to the new norm, even if it is built on a monstrous secret. The horror of what happened is pushed into the furthest corners of the subconscious, covered by layers of daily worries. Perhaps Daniel, continuing to live in Nova Scotia, really focused on the fight for Meadow, and this fight became his new truth, supplanting the old one. Malia, starting a new life elsewhere, could have fully immersed herself in the role of a single mother to her only remaining child, trying to forget that she once had three. This architecture of denial is incredibly strong. It can withstand decades, but it has a weak spot. Any unexpected reminder of the past, a photograph, a question, a news story, can breach the wall. And then the repressed horror and guilt burst out, threatening to destroy the entire structure. This is what investigators are hoping for. The case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan, despite the lack of a resolution, taught several harsh but important lessons. Lesson number 1. Evil is banal, not theatrical. We are used to thinking that monstrous crimes are committed by monsters with a crazed look in their eyes. But this story shows that evil can be quiet, domestic, and painfully banal. It can be born not from a cunning plan, but from a series of bad decisions, from weakness, fear, and selfishness. It can hide behind the face of a tired young mother or a seemingly caring stepfather. The most terrible tragedies often happen not in dark alleys, but in the shabby kitchens of ordinary homes. Lesson number 2. The community's intuition is often right. From the very beginning, even before all the contradictions became known, many neighbors, the online community, and ordinary observers had a persistent feeling that something was wrong. This collective gut feeling, based on thousands of small observations of behavior, body language, and tone of voice, turned out to be more accurate than any official version. This case underscored the importance of listening to public intuition, which, although not proof, often points the investigation in the right direction. Lesson number 3. Justice is not always a verdict. In an ideal world, the guilty would be found, convicted, and punished. But in the real world, justice can take other forms. For Daniel and Malia, even if they escape legal punishment, their lives have already become a prison. They live in constant fear of exposure. They have lost respect, trust, and perhaps the ability for normal human relationships. They are doomed to carry this secret for the rest of their lives, looking over their shoulders and seeing a silent accusation in the eyes of others. This is not the justice that the loved ones of Lilly and Jack would want, but it is also a form of retribution, a life sentence in the prison of one's own conscience. An unfinished symphony, the finale that will not be. Ultimately, the story of Lilly and Jack Sullivan is an unfinished symphony. It has an exposition, a development, a climax, but no finale. It breaks off on the highest note, leaving the listener in a state of agonizing uncertainty. And perhaps this is its most powerful and frightening message. Some mysteries remain unsolved. Some questions remain unanswered. We live in a world where not everything has a logical explanation, where good does not always triumph, and where justice does not always prevail. The case of Lilly and Jack will forever remain in the collective memory as a symbol of the darkest side of human nature, and as a reminder of two children whose short lives were cut off and their story stolen by those who were supposed to protect them. They were not just missing, they were erased, first from life and then from the truth. And as a girl named Meadow grows up somewhere under a different sky, not knowing that she once had a brother and a sister, as a file that may never be closed sits in a police archive, and as the wind rustles through the branches in the forests of Nova Scotia, carrying the echo of unspoken words, the story of Lilly and Jack Sullivan will continue, not as an investigation, but as a legend. A dark, cold, and eternal legend of a silence that was louder than any scream.
for what's trending in true crime, jail emails between accused killer Stephen Stearns and his family indicate that they think that someone else was involved in the death of 13-year-old Madeleine Soto.
So she's walking towards the school. Do you continue straight when you leave? Or do you turn around? I turned around. I went back the other way. I was watching her. I was turning weird. She was going the right direction. So it looked okay.
Madeleine Soto, born on February 22, 2011, to Jennifer Soto and Tyler Wallace, was a girl whose life held great promise. She adored the cartoon Lilo and Stitch, enjoyed playing the flute, loved fishing, and had a boundless affection for all animals. Those around her described Madeleine as a sweet girl, consistently kind to others who had no conflicts with anyone. She was loving, a bit mischievous, and self-assured. However, beneath this bright exterior lay inner turmoil. Madeleine struggled with constant anxiety and ADHD and at times found it difficult to cope with these conditions, though she always tried to hide her difficulties. Her mother, Jennifer, also carried the burden of her own psychological problems. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and, despite active medication, often experienced difficulties. Madeleine's biological father, Tyler, lived in Texas. His relationship with Jennifer Soto was short-lived. In early 2010, after temporarily breaking off his engagement with his fiancée, Tatiana, Tyler found solace in Jen's arms. It was during this period that Jen became pregnant with Madeleine. Shortly after learning of the pregnancy, Tyler reunited with Tatiana, and they married in April 2011, just a few months after Madeleine's birth. The girl spent several weeks with her father each summer. Madeleine primarily lived with her mother in their condominium in Kissimmee, Florida, just a few minutes' drive from Disney World. They shared their home in the Venetian Bay Village complex, located in a fairly prestigious gated community, with 2 other tenants who rented rooms from Jennifer. This rental arrangement likely allowed Jennifer to afford living in such a location. In the 4-bedroom home, 2 rooms were occupied by tenants, leaving 2 for Jennifer, Madeleine, and Stephen Stearns, a man Jennifer began dating around 2018, when Madeleine was about 7 years old. Stephen Stearns, 37, once worked at Disney World but had no steady employment in recent years. He came from a wealthy family and essentially moved from his parents' million-dollar home directly into Jennifer and Madeleine's condominium. The living situation in the family was somewhat unusual. Jennifer occupied the master bedroom. When her relationship with Stefan was going through a rough patch, he would move into another room. Madeleine had what was described as a makeshift room with thin, possibly non-structural walls on the first floor of the house. On the evening of February 25, 2024, just 3 days after her 13th birthday, Madeleine celebrated the occasion at a party hosted by her grandmother at her home. After the party, her aunt drove Maddie home. Neither Jennifer nor Stefan attended the birthday party. Jennifer, according to her, worked from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. Stefan, however, was not invited because he didn't get along with Jennifer's mother, Madeleine's grandmother. Madeleine returned home around 10 p.m. Jennifer arrived about an hour later, around 11 p.m. By this time, Stefan was already in the condominium. This evening, following the celebration of a significant milestone in Madeleine's life, became the prelude to tragic events. Despite the outward appearance of a normal, albeit somewhat unconventional family, some details could have raised concerns even then. Madeleine's friends recalled that, despite her attachment to Stefan, with whom she often texted and FaceTimed, she sometimes complained about her mother, calling her bipolar and mentioning frequent arguments. Teachers noticed that Madeleine, sweet but distractible due to ADHD, often looked tired in class, would put her head down and close her eyes. She had recently stopped taking her prescribed medication because it made her drowsy. Moreover, in early 2024, Madeleine shared with friends her plans to run away from home as soon as she turned 13 and build herself a cabin in the woods. These warning signs may have been harbingers of the impending tragedy hidden behind the facade of life in a quiet Orlando suburb. Monday morning, February 26, 2024 began, according to Stephen Stearns, quite ordinarily. He claimed that he and Madeleine got up around 7 a.m., perhaps a little later. The plan was to have breakfast at McDonald's on the way to school, so they even left home a bit earlier than usual, around 7:30, 7:45 a.m. According to his account, Madeleine slept almost the entire way in the car. When they pulled up to McDonald's, she supposedly changed her mind about eating there. Stefan drove Madeleine to Hunters Creek Middle School. However, according to his version, he didn't drop her off right at the school building. Instead, he let her out about a block away from the school, near the Peace United Methodist Church on Town Loop Boulevard. The reason for this strange drop-off, Stephen said, was that Madeleine was going through a phase and was embarrassed by his old silver 2010 Lincoln. She allegedly asked him to stop further away so she could walk to school. Stephen claimed he saw Madeleine walking towards the school, rummaging through her backpack. He assumed she was looking for her headphones. This happened, by his estimate, between 8:20 and 8:40 a.m. He told her, "Have a good day at school, love you," to which she replied, "Thanks, I love you too." However, Madeleine never showed up at school that day. The first person to raise the alarm was her mother, Jennifer Soto. Around 4:30 p.m., she arrived at the school to pick up her daughter. When Madeleine didn't come out with the other students, Jennifer spoke to school staff. They informed her that Madeleine hadn't attended classes at all. School policy at the time was to notify parents of a student's absence only after the end of the school day, a policy that was subsequently changed. The automated call informing Jennifer of Madeleine's absence was not scheduled to go out until 5:45 p.m., by which time the girl had been missing for nearly 8 hours. Jennifer, overcome with panic, began searching. She thought Madeleine might have gone to her grandmother's office, which was near the school and where Madeleine sometimes went after classes, but she wasn't there either. Jennifer started searching the surrounding areas, first by car, then on foot. Unable to find any trace of her daughter, sometime after 4:30 p.m., 2 unidentified women called 911 on Jennifer's behalf to report a missing child. From her mother's office, Jennifer and others, including Stephen Stearns, awaited the police. The 911 call was logged closer to 8:00 p.m. on February 26th. It reported that 13-year-old Madeleine Soto was missing. "My daughter was dropped off near the school this morning but never made it. I went to pick her up from school today and she never came out." Jennifer's voice could be heard on the recording of the call with the dispatcher. She also mentioned that she had received an email from the school about her daughter's absence and that a teacher had confirmed Madeleine was not in class. When the first officers arrived, Jennifer and Stefan provided initial information. Jennifer reported last seeing Madeleine the previous evening, around 11:00 p.m. before she went to bed. She also mentioned that Madeleine had never run away from home before. When describing the clothes Madeleine supposedly wore to school, Stefan mentioned a green hoodie and white Crocs. Jennifer added that she was wearing black shorts. This detail, Jennifer's knowledge of the clothing, would later raise questions, as she would change her testimony regarding whether she had seen Madeleine that morning. Jennifer also showed the officers a recent photo of Madeleine taken on her birthday. She reported that Madeleine's phone was left at home, which, she said, was not uncommon for her daughter due to her ADHD. Madeleine's school laptop was trackable, but hadn't been turned on since Sunday. Stefan, in turn, repeated his story about dropping Madeleine off at the church, specifying the time, around 8:30, 8:40 a.m., and adding that they both, he and Jennifer, had dropped her off. This point also contained a contradiction, as Jennifer would later state that she had not seen Madeleine that morning. Police began their investigation based on these initial, yet already inconsistent statements. The police investigation immediately focused on the timeline of events presented by Stephen Stearns, as he was, by his own account, the last person to see Madeleine alive. His story about dropping Madeleine off near the Peace United Methodist Church, a block from Hunters Creek Middle School, because she was embarrassed by his old Lincoln, sounded somewhat strained, but initially there was no reason not to believe him. He even showed police the approximate drop-off spot on Town Loop Boulevard. Indeed, a camera located in front of the church at the intersection of Town Loop Boulevard and Hunters Park Lane captured a figure resembling a teenager entering the church grounds around 8:40 a.m., sitting on the ground in the parking lot, and then, around 8:58 a.m., getting up and walking towards the school. However, The recording quality was extremely poor. It was impossible to confidently identify Madeleine or even clearly distinguish her clothing to compare with the description given by Stefan and Jennifer. Moreover, the vehicle that dropped off this figure looked more like a dark sedan than Stefan's silver Lincoln. Traffic cameras did capture Stefan's Lincoln in the school area that morning, but its route did not entirely match his account. Instead of reaching the stated drop-off location, his car, as it approached the school, was seen making a turn and heading in the opposite direction. When investigators pointed out this discrepancy to Stefan, his car was seen heading south, towards Kissimmee, at 8:10 a.m. Although he claimed to have dropped Madeleine off later and further north, he explained it by saying he had forgotten his gate remote for the residential complex and had to return home to get it and drive through the main entrance using his parking pass. He apologized, saying he was giving approximate times and that he was not a morning person. Jennifer Soto's statements also began to raise questions. Initially, as heard on an officer's Bodycam recording, she seemed to confirm details of Madeleine's clothing, implying she had seen her daughter that morning. However, she later changed her testimony, stating she had only possibly heard Madeleine in the kitchen between 7 and 8 a.m. but had not seen her. Then she retracted even that, saying it was probably one of their housemates. This inconsistency was significant. If she hadn't seen Madeleine, how did she know what she was wearing? Jennifer interpreted the fact that both Madeleine's cell phone and her school laptop were left at home as a possible sign of her daughter's forgetfulness due to ADHD. The laptop, it turned out, had not been turned on since Sunday, February 25th. Perhaps one of Stefan's most suspicious actions that day was the accidental factory reset of his iPhone. He told Jennifer that after returning home, and after Jennifer returned from a doctor's appointment around 11 a.m., he decided to update his iPhone, but accidentally erased all data in the process. He also told Jennifer that both he and Madeleine had forgotten their phones at home that morning. The claim about Madeleine forgetting her phone was plausible due to her ADHD, but Stefan, according to acquaintances, constantly used his phone, and his forgetfulness seemed highly unlikely. Moreover, as forensic examination would later establish, Stefan Factory reset his phone not once, but twice on the day of Madeleine's disappearance. Such carelessness in the midst of a search for his missing stepdaughter looked extremely suspicious and suggested an attempt to hide evidence. Stefan also told Jennifer that, despite the forgotten phones, the morning had gone well. He claimed he had repeatedly offered to take Madeleine to McDonald's, even though it was their initial plan and they had even woken up earlier for it, but she had refused. This contradicted his own words that Madeleine had slept almost the entire way to school. If she was sleeping, how could he have repeatedly offered her McDonald's? These small but numerous inconsistencies and oddities in Stefan's and Jennifer's behavior and accounts increasingly strengthened investigators' suspicions. As the investigation deepened, more disturbing details about the Soto Stearns family life, particularly regarding sleeping arrangements, began to emerge. Jennifer Soto told detectives during one interrogation that Madeleine, her 13-year-old daughter, had slept upstairs alone with Stefan the night before her disappearance. Jennifer herself claimed that the three of them usually slept in one bed, but on that particular night, she had asked Madeleine and Stefan to sleep together because she needed a good night's rest before starting a new job. This statement seemed odd, considering that, according to some reports, Jennifer received disability benefits and worked very little so as not to affect these payments. Thus, her excuse for missing Madeleine's birthday and sending her daughter to sleep with an adult man because of work seemed unconvincing. Madeleine had her own, albeit makeshift, bedroom on the first floor, so there was no objective need for her to sleep in the same bed as Stefan. All three, Jennifer, Stefan, and Madeleine, had separate sleeping spaces. However, according to Jennifer, it was common for her daughter to sleep with Stefan, sometimes in her presence and sometimes without her. Jennifer added that due to her own anxiety, she sometimes found it difficult to sleep with anyone in the same bed. She also said that although Madeleine had her own room, she almost never slept there, only spending time there during the day. Stefan, in turn, explained the co-sleeping with Madeleine to the police by saying the girl supposedly needed human contact to fall asleep. He called it snuggling her. "She's extremely dependent. She absolutely dislikes being alone. She needs human presence nearby," Stefan said. He claimed that he and Jennifer had tried to wean her off this, but it was difficult. Information obtained from a woman who once worked with Stefan and dated him in late 2022 added even more grim details to this picture. According to her, during that period, Stefan had allegedly broken up with Jennifer, and that's when they started dating. However, he never stayed overnight at her place, always returning to the Soto home, claiming that Madeleine and Jennifer couldn't sleep without him. This woman also recounted that Stefan confessed to her that he slept in the same bed with Madeleine, and one morning he woke up with an erection and had to quickly turn away. Upon learning this, the woman felt very uncomfortable and ended her contact with Stefan. The decisive breakthrough in the investigation came after police gained access to the contents of Stefan's phone. Despite his attempts to accidentally erase all data by performing a double factory reset, digital forensic specialists were able to recover a significant amount of information. What they discovered was shocking. Numerous images and video recordings evidencing sexual abuse of little Madeleine were found on Stefan's phone. These materials dated back at least 2 years, starting when Madeleine was only 8 or 9 years old. In total, about 500 photographs of an extremely graphic nature were discovered. Later, when investigators gained access to Stefan's Google Drive, they discovered there tens of thousands more similar images. Stefan was clearly visible in many of these photos and videos, leaving no doubt about his involvement. The rooms depicted in the photographs matched the interiors of Jennifer's condominium where the family lived. During one of the interrogations, even before the full analysis of the phone, when investigators asked Stefan what he thought might be on his phone, he mentioned text messages, emails, old stuff, photos of trains, lightsabers, and Disney. When he was directly told that there were certain photographs on the phone and that, being an intelligent man, he should understand what they were talking about, Stefan became nervous and asked if he should speak to an attorney. This was a clear indication that he was aware of the compromising nature of his device's contents. Besides materials concerning Madeleine, a photograph of one of Jennifer's housemates, naked in the bathroom, was found on Stefan's phone. The housemate stated that she had not given Stefan permission to take such a picture, indicating his propensity for secret filming and voyeurism. Also found on the phone were search queries Stefan had made a few weeks before Madeleine's disappearance for the phrase sevoflurane and show up in a drug test. Sevoflurane is an anesthetic that can induce hypnosis and amnesia and is typically used for medical purposes. This query raised very alarming thoughts about Stefan's possible plans. Based on these horrifying findings, 2 days after Madeleine's disappearance, Stefan Stearns was arrested by the Kissimmee police. The initial charges were not directly related to Madeleine's disappearance. In total, he faced over 60 charges, including sexual assault and specific charges related to his actions against a minor. Metadata containing the date each image or video was taken allowed investigators to establish that many of these crimes were committed when Madeleine was less than 1. Okay, continuing the translation from where we left off. When Madeleine was less than 12 years old, which is a particularly heinous crime. After Stefan's arrest, as he was being driven in a police car, he looked very nervous. Jennifer Soto, however, at that moment still believed that the police had the wrong guy. She even called Stefan's father and told him that, in her opinion, Stefan needed a lawyer. This reaction from a mother whose daughter was missing and whose partner was the last one to see her looked extremely strange and would later be carefully analyzed by investigators. Stefan's arrest on charges of sexual crimes against Madeleine was the first step towards uncovering the monstrous truth hidden within the walls of their Kissimmee home. It also drastically changed the direction of the investigation into the girl's disappearance, shifting the focus from a simple search for a missing child to much darker versions of events. The revelations contained in Stefan's phone were so horrifying that they inevitably led to the assumption of his involvement in her disappearance and, possibly, her death. The discovery on Stefan Stearns' phone of a vast amount of material evidencing years of sexual abuse of Madeleine Soto fundamentally changed the course of the investigation. The case rapidly escalated from a missing child search to a possible murder investigation, and Stefan Stearns became the prime suspect. Investigators meticulously analyzed recordings from numerous traffic cameras and surveillance systems to reconstruct Stefan's route on the morning of Madeleine's disappearance. What they saw not only contradicted his initial statements, but also painted a terrifying picture. Police concluded that Madeleine was never dropped off at school on February 26th. Instead, they were convinced that the girl was already dead by the time Stefan supposedly drove her to class. One of the key video recordings was obtained from a camera in their residential complex. At 7:30 a.m. on February 26th, even before Stefan was supposed to take Madeleine to school according to his account, the camera captured him throwing Madeleine's backpack and her school laptop into a dumpster. Detectives later retrieved these items from the trash. Along with them, a trash bag was found containing one of Madeleine's white Crocs. The other matching shoe was found right in Jennifer's room. These were the very shoes Madeleine was last seen wearing, according to Jennifer and Stefan. This fact further underscored the falsity of their initial statements. Around 8:19 or 8:20 a.m., Stefan Stearns was again spotted by cameras as he was driving out of the residential complex. This time, Madeleine was also visible in the car, in the front passenger seat. However, her appearance raised serious concerns. Her head was unnaturally tilted onto her left shoulder, her mouth wide open. One police report described her condition as limp, in an abnormal position for a seated person. Everything indicated that she was no longer alive. Further analysis of video recordings led investigators to a parking lot near the Holiday Inn Club Vacations on South John Young Parkway. Around 9:40 a.m., a camera recorded Stefan's car entering this parking lot. Stefan was then seen getting out of the car, opening the passenger door, taking out what appeared to be a lifeless female body, and moving it into the trunk of his car. After that, the car left the parking lot. Detectives summoned Jennifer Soto for another interrogation. She was informed that the investigation had progressed to a homicide case, as the police believed Madeleine was deceased. When she was shown photos of Madeleine in Stefan's car, where she appeared lifeless, Jennifer sat silently for a few moments and then began to cry. However, her reaction and subsequent statements continued to raise serious doubts among investigators about her sincerity and complete unawareness. During this interrogation, Jennifer revealed that when Stefan first moved in with them, there was a rule that Madeleine should not sleep in the same bed with him. Why would such a rule even be necessary? This question remained unanswered. Later, according to Jennifer, Madeleine herself began asking for sleepovers with Stefan, which included eating popcorn, watching movies, and sleeping together. Jennifer allegedly allowed this because Madeleine and Stefan got along very well. She admitted that Stefan was sometimes in his boxers, and that he sometimes woke up hugging Madeleine. When investigators asked if she didn't find this strange, Jennifer replied no. She continued to deny knowing anything about the ongoing victimization of her daughter. After being shown photographs proving Stefan's sexual abuse of Madeleine, she stated that she now believed in his guilt, calling him a master of lies and manipulation. She also said that he was often angry and irritable, but only got angry at Madeleine in the context of parenting. However, even at this moment, a phrase was uttered that shocked investigators. Jennifer said that if Stefan killed her daughter, it was evil, but sex is not evil. This phrase, according to the detective, indicated that Jennifer might have already come to terms with her daughter's victimization, and her emotions during the interview seemed fake. Stefan Stearns' accounts of his movements on February 26 were full of contradictions and inconsistencies, which became increasingly apparent as evidence was gathered. He claimed that after dropping Madeleine off at school, which had already been disproven by video recordings, he went to a vape shop, but it was closed, so he returned home. Then he allegedly went to the same vape shop again, and after that, headed to several video game stores, including House Rules. However, as with other locations he claimed to have visited, cameras recorded his car moving in the direction of these stores, but never showed him actually entering or making purchases. One of the key parts of his alibi was the story about a flat tire. Stefan claimed that sometime between noon and 2 p.m., he had to change a tire. He said this happened when he was stopped somewhere on US 192, a rural road with light traffic. He couldn't pinpoint exactly where on the shoulder he had stopped. Cameras did record his vehicle in this area, but couldn't determine his full route or confirm the flat tire incident. Later, during a search of the dumpsters at their residential complex, a tire tread matching the rear passenger tire of his Lincoln was found, confirming that he had indeed changed a tire. This happened around 4:40 p.m., approximately the same time Jennifer Soto was already searching for Madeleine at the school. Stefan also disposed of his car's spare tire to bolster his story about the flat tire. Investigators also found out that Stefan had lied about his trip to Northport, Florida, where his parents lived. He claimed he had gone there for unknown reasons. Jennifer, however, said that Stefan had taken her car, a Nissan Sentra, and gone to look for Maddie, supposedly driving up and down US 192. The decisive breakthrough in the search for Madeleine occurred on March 1, 2024, the same day Jennifer was giving another interrogation. A man contacted the police who had seen a news report about the missing girl and remembered seeing Stefan's car on February 26th. He reported that around 1:30 p.m. he saw a silver sedan, similar to Stefan's Lincoln, parked on the shoulder of Hickory Tree Road. The man, Stefan, was standing near the car with a lug wrench in his hand. The witness described him as looking scared, but at the time he assumed the man was just upset about a flat tire and being stranded on the roadside. Law enforcement was also able to obtain surveillance camera footage from a street adjacent to Hickory Tree Road. It showed a car very similar to Stefan's vehicle driving on Hickory Tree Road around 2:00 p.m. Upon receiving this information, police immediately dispatched search teams to this rural area of Osceola County. They noticed locked gates on both sides of the road. After the property owner opened them, it took the search team only a few minutes to make the horrific discovery. Behind a row of bamboo trees, not far from the road, they first saw a pair of blue jeans, and then Madeleine Soto's body itself. The girl was found wearing a green hoodie, blue jeans, and white socks. An important detail was that the soles of her socks were clean, indicating that she had not walked on the ground herself. Dry grass and hay were also found on her body, with which she had apparently been covered. The location where the body was found was locked, and the lock was undamaged. This meant that Stefan most likely had to throw Madeleine's body over a barbed wire fence, then climb over himself and move her to the bamboo trees. Madeleine Soto's body was immediately taken to the medical examiner's office. The autopsy determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide. The grim discovery on Hickory Tree Road put an end to the agonizing search and confirmed the investigators' worst fears. After the discovery of Madeleine Soto's body and the determination of her cause of death, asphyxiation, Stefan Stearns was officially charged with first-degree murder. By this time, he was already under arrest on more than 60 counts. Interrogations of Jennifer Soto continued, and more alarming details emerged, pointing to her, at the very least, passive role or profound ignorance bordering on denial of reality. She told investigators that she was afraid of a Woody Allen situation arising, referring to the scandalous story of the director who married his young stepdaughter. The very fact of such thoughts in a mother, unless she suspected an unhealthy relationship in the house, seemed strange. Jennifer also reported that she had broken up with Stefan in December 2020 because he was too messy. However, she continued to let him live in their home because he was her best friend. Stefan, after this breakup, moved into the upstairs bedroom and lived there until December 2023, after which he moved in with his parents in Northport. At the time of Madeleine's disappearance, according to Jennifer, he was only at their house to take Madeleine to school because Jennifer herself was too tired. These explanations seemed extremely unconvincing, especially in light of the fact that Stefan apparently had free access to the house and stayed there overnight. Her comment that sex is not evil, made in the context of discussing the sexual abuse of her daughter, continued to shock investigators. This, along with her initial reaction to Stefan's arrest, calling his father with advice to hire a lawyer, and her description of Stefan as a master of lies and manipulation only after irrefutable evidence was presented, created the impression that she either knew much more than she was saying or was in a state of profound denial. Investigators noted that during interrogations, her emotions seemed fake, and that she appeared to have already come to terms with her daughter's victimization. During one interrogation, investigators discussed possible motives for the murder with Jennifer, including the theory that Madeleine might have been pregnant. They mentioned that Madeleine and her friend, a boy, allegedly were not menstruating, and that someone found it strange that their cycles no longer coincided. A question was also asked about a pregnancy test found at home, which did not belong to Jennifer. Jennifer replied that she had 2 tests under the bathroom sink, but had not checked if they were still there. Stefan Stearns' parents also testified. They described their son as a person who had constantly lied to them about practically everything from a very early age. Stefan's father suggested that his behavior might have been influenced by a car accident Stefan was involved in as a child. At the age of 7 or 8, he was hit twice by a car, a 4x4 SUV, the driver of which apparently did it intentionally, hitting him first from the front and then backing up from behind on the head. The parents claimed they noticed significant changes in their son after this incident. However, how truthful these statements are and what influence this might have had on Stefan remains a matter of speculation. The parents themselves did not seem to believe in his innocence, even when he called them from jail insisting on it. One of the strangest and most disturbing artifacts related to the case was a poem titled Always, which is believed to have been written by Stefan. It read, Your hair was like honey, eyes of stormy blue, gone too soon. I'll always miss you. I love you so much. I would die for you. My tears have no end. I'll always miss you. When I held you in my arms, my heart died with you. Rest in peace, sweetie. I'll always miss you. This poem, full of false remorse and sentimentality, looked particularly cynical against the backdrop of the crimes he committed. The state of Florida announced its intention to seek the death penalty for Stephen Stearns. Stephen himself subsequently refused to appear in court for hearings, expressing dissatisfaction with the conditions of his detention in the county jail. Under Florida law, a unanimous jury decision is no longer required for a death sentence. A vote of 8 out of 12 is sufficient. The trials for sexual assault and murder were scheduled for 2025. The Madeleine Soto case caused widespread public outcry and deep sorrow. Her friends at school mourned her, and a prayer vigil for her safe return tragically turned into a memorial service on the night she was found. Madeleine's tragedy became a stark reminder that monstrous crimes can be hidden behind the facade of ordinary life in quiet suburbs, and that children, who should be protected, sometimes find themselves defenseless in the face of evil. The question of Jennifer Soto's degree of awareness and possible complicity remained open and was actively discussed by the public, although she was not officially a suspect in the murder case.